Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mikowski, and joining me from the great city of New Orleans is my friend and colleague, Sean Michael Chick. Sean, how are you today?
Oh, I'm all right. It's a lovely Thursday. Oh, afternoon now. It's just past 12
So,
over here.
and
So
is the
lovely.
Crescent City treating you well?
It's very hot here right now. Well, no, not today and yesterday, but we had a big heat spike last weekend.
And
Yeah.
it's only the end of May, which
Yeah.
suggests
Well,
there's room for it to get worse.
oh, oh no, we had 2 weeks ago the weather. We had this cool front come in, and it's actually been not been very harsh, and then it just shot up like 20 degrees or something.
Ooh, 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 ooh.
Yeah. I got it was rough out there. You could I had a lot of cancellations for tours or just some other person in a different company had somebody just drop on their tour
Oh, wow. Jeez.
because it just I got too fast got too hot too fast, you know.
Too hot, too
Uh,
fast.
and
Well, I'm
yeah,
glad to have you with us. This is actually our second attempt at doing this. You got flooded out not too long ago either.
yeah, God, that was horrible. It was almost knee deep in places, and people were like, "Why didn't you just wait for the water to come down?" Like my phone was at 2%,
Yeah.
and I had to come for your stuff, and then by the time I got here, I was like, "I am not doing anything."
Yeah. Oh,
I literally did the whole thing to the other joke about like, like I had to march this many miles in the snow to get to school. Well, that was me. I had to march that many. I had to march miles in a flood and flooded streets. Oh man.
well, I'm delighted to have you with us today. We're here to talk about Sean's new book, A Grand Opening Squandered, part of the Emerging Civil War series. It's the opening battles for Petersburg. And people kind of just lump Petersburg together, sort of this 9 month thing, if they even think about Petersburg. But you make a real compelling case. Like the Battle of Petersburg, which kicks the whole thing off, is a significant sized Civil War battle by any objective measure, and it tends to get forgotten about.
Yeah, that's one of the things that because the origins where I was writing a thesis about Governor Kimball Warren. And I just started reading about Petersburg, and I'm like, wait, this is a big battle. Any books on it? And I found Thomas Howe's book from the 1980s, which is an expensive book.
Mhm.
I managed to get like this beat up copy for $25. That was the cheap one.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Jeez.
You know,
Now, you helped fill that historiographical gap by writing a book about those opening battles. This is
yeah.
actually your second attempt at tackling that. What was it that was so fascinating? That's like, I've got to write about this.
I think that it really did. Well, one was that nobody had done it. Well, I say nobody had done it. I'm sorry, Thomas Howe did. My bad. Got overstating it, but it did. It's in all the books. It's in, for instance, in Ken Burns' Civil War. Can't say that for Stone's River. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I'm never going to forgive him for that, by the way, that he just doesn't mention the Battle of Stones River because Lee, Jackson, Grant, and Sherman aren't there.
Yeah. Right.
But it, it's the thing is also is that the my first time in really encountering the battle, besides Ken Burns' Civil War, was the William Davis book Death in the Trenches from the remember those Time Life Gray Civil War books.
Yeah.
By the way, I
Yeah.
just bought a bundle of them for $20.
Oh, nice. Good deal.
Oh yeah,
Good deal.
they have such great images and these excellent maps too. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a deal. Let's pick these up. So, anyways, Death in the Trenches. When I was reading it so long ago, I was very struck. I was like, wow, this is a big battle, but also very consequential because Petersburg falls, Richmond falls.
Right.
Richmond falls, Lincoln's reelected, the pressure's off Grant. You know, the pressure's off Lincoln too. And so I looked at it and I thought, wow, this is a major, significant battle. And besides being just intrigued about the battle itself, I always go back and say, like, why is this not discussed? And, I devoted a whole chapter in the book that was published in 2015 to try and explain why is this not discussed. Wrote a short essay the same, a short appendix piece for Grand Opening Squandered because it's much easier to find books on a variety of battles that are, I would say, less significant than Petersburg.
Sure, sure.
You know?
It's well, and I found the same thing writing about Spotsylvania, third biggest battle of the war, and
Yeah.
hardly anybody has written about it, when you compare it to even Chickamauga, but certainly when you compare it to Gettysburg. So
Oh
I,
yeah,
I
yeah,
I understand your frustration.
yeah, yeah. No, good point about Spotsylvania. And let me ask you: did anybody write anything a big book before Gordon Rea?
No, Gordon was really Bill Matter's book came out in the late 80s, so I guess he was just before Gordon, but and then Gordon kind of follows in after that. But Bill Matter's book, super detailed, not especially captivative read. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
Gordon was really important about that. So, but yeah, so I can understand, geez, you got this big battle in Petersburg. Not a lot of people have written about it. Um, so I can see why that's attractive to you. And I should mention, this book, which is your second go at the opening of the conflict in Petersburg, is actually going to be the first of several that we'll be having in the Emerging Civil War series from you about the Petersburg campaign, which would explain if anybody's wondering, well, gosh, why is he writing the same book a second time? We've got a series coming.
Well, I did want to return to it regardless because it's uh how should I say, like for instance, like old blog posts, Emerging Civil War. I'll go back and edit them years
Yeah.
later. I don't know. I'm always a tinkerer, and so I look at the book and I go, "Oh man, I got that wrong," or I
Yeah.
go, "Wait, I didn't phrase that right," or or you know, and I not now. I want to finish Shiloh and I have some other ideas, but within the next 5 to 10 years, I want to return to Petersburg and do the battle again, you
Mm.
know, in particular because I've learned so much more about how to research and other things too since
Yeah.
then. So I feel like I
Yeah.
can make a better book. But this was a great chance for me to do some revisions and also to get a bunch of images published, you know. I love that one we have in there. We had the Confederates attacking at Bermuda 100 on June 17th, and we have the
Yeah.
sketch version, then we have the finalized version. I
Yeah.
love stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. It's neat to kind of see the evolution of how that stuff takes place in visual form. So so the battle itself, a lot of people probably don't know many of the details. Uh, so give us a quick sketch of what actually happens in the Battle of Petersburg.
Okay, so the Battle of Petersburg comes in the aftermath of Cold Harbor. Grant and Meade's final attack was a bloody failure, as is known. That was on June 3rd. The Army takes a bit of a break, and Grant at that point has to decide what he's going to do next. Now, I'm very much of the opinion that Grant kind of figured he was going to Richmond, Petersburg from the very beginning. You know, because one of my contentions is that Lincoln is the one who tells Grant Lee's army is your target. If you look at Grant as a general, the way he operated in the West, he goes after strategic points. If you go after a strategic point, you're going to fight a battle anyway.
Mhm.
So makes perfect sense. Um, so I think when Grant is there, it's very logical for him to go to Petersburg, swing the army that way. And he starts devising his plans. And he's very good at secrecy with this one, too. You're not going to have any big leaks. And one of the smart things Grant does is he sends the 18th Corps to go there first. 18th Corps was loaned from the Army of the James, led by Benjamin Butler, to the Army of the Potomac, led by Meade. And his thinking is that if you return 18th Corps, it just looks like you're returning troops to Butler. That's actually how Lee interprets it right away. The other part of the plan is then to disengage the army from Cold Harbor and cross the James River, which is a hell of a feat because you got to cross at a very wide point. And they're famously going to make this giant pontoon bridge, one of the great engineering feats of the war. While at the same time, 18th Corps is going to go by boat, land at Bermuda 100, cross over to City Point, and then dash for Petersburg. And so they're trying to take the city before the Confederates can heavily reinforce it. So June 15th, 18th Corps approaches Petersburg, led by William F. Smith. Smith, in many ways, is a very frustrating general because he has some very obvious talents and gifts, but at the same time, he's a terrible subordinate. And while sometimes he can be very tactically smart, he is also given to extreme caution.
Mm.
And in the advance there, he gets into a really nasty skirmish with Confederate cavalry led by James Deering. He approaches Petersburg and he sees the very impressive Confederate defensive works. And not just that, while the Confederates were outnumbered, there was only about roughly maybe 2,500 of them there. Um, they had a lot of artillery, actually, like more cannons than you'd expect. So the Confederates are firing their cannons off constantly, accurate artillery fire. Smith backs his forces off and then spends most of June 15th planning how to attack. He finally attacks late in the day, around 6 p.m., and overwhelms the Confederate position. But he does not press on, partially because the sun is setting, the terrain ahead of him is rough, his own troops are disorganized, and then Winfield Scott Hancock arrives at the Second Corps. They were supposed to be there earlier, but there had been a communication failure. And you remember I talked about how Grant was secret about all this stuff. Well, that helped make sure Lee didn't detect things, but it also meant a lot of his own commanders are not properly in the loop either. Always the problem with secrecy. And so Smith and Hancock decide not to attack. And there are numerous accounts of Union soldiers yelling, put us in there, we'll finish it. Because, night attacks usually don't work, right? But this is an occasion where it could have, because it was a cloudless night with a bright moon. If you're going to make any kind of a night attack, that would be the time. Now, regardless of all that, the second day happens, June 16th. By that time, the Confederates have more troops coming in. They will eventually have roughly 15,000 men there under Beauregard. He was the commander in the department. Beauregard very quickly saw that the danger Petersburg was in and rushed troops that way, including stripping the troops out of Bermuda 100, which was very much a big gamble.
Right.
But Beauregard takes that chance. And
because if Butler catches on, he can then push onward to Richmond from there.
he could possibly push on to Richmond. He definitely can cut you off.
Yeah.
Because remember, Lee's army is on the other side of the James. If they're going to get to you, they would have to go through Butler then.
Yeah.
So he can also delay Lee, which actually is what's going to happen. Because Butler does, on June 16th, detects the Confederates are gone and does attack and starts ripping up the railroads. But to be fair to Butler, he didn't have that many men. He had 10th Corps. Some of his troops, by the way, were these 100-day Ohio soldiers who had said, we'll be there for the summer to free troops up to go to the front. We'll be garrison troops. But then some of them get sent to the front. By the way, those men, I found an account, like Lincoln, days after this battle, goes to visit the men, and the Ohio troops boo him.
Oh,
Oh yeah, no. Lincoln, it's interesting, when Lincoln tours the army, he's usually positively received, but
right.
not in 10th Corps.
Yeah.
He also gives a speech in 10th Corps. He says, the war is almost done. This guy said, do you think we're stupid? Anyway, sorry. So anyways,
that's right. I got you off track there. So Beauregard pulls guys away from Bermuda 100.
I like doing diversions, But anyway, so the morning is June 16th. Hancock only launches a probe, a very bloody probe, gets one of his brigade commanders, Thomas Egan, horribly wounded. But Hancock and Smith do not press in, and then Meade arrives along with the rest of Second Corps, and Ninth Corps will be coming in later that day. One of the problems the Unions ran into is there was a bad heat wave and a drought going on as well that's going to last well into July. Oh yeah, I was reading this one Confederate soldier's diary. He's just talking throughout June and July about the heat, and eventually he says, I must be crazy because I keep keeping a diary. Only a madman would keep a diary right now. And he constantly is talking about how hot the weather is, and you can kind of almost read the diary where it's like he's kind of going a little crazy.
Yeah.
And then it rains and he goes like hallelujah or something, the equivalent thereof. Anyways, so So what happens is Meade arrives and decides that he is going to attack Beauregard. And what happens is he doesn't try to flank him, though. See, Beauregard's right flank is completely open. If you swing a corps out that way, you can get around him. Now, I mentioned the heat. When these Union soldiers are coming up, you're talking about men who are thirsty. I've read accounts of these men starting to drink out of swamps in some cases. Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, one of the guys says our regiment was quite sick afterwards, but they were, men are just like, you have other accounts, they would see men just digging holes in the ground looking for water. So you have this very, very hot, thirsty, tired army. And then keep in mind all the horrific losses they've suffered from Wilderness, Spotsylvania, North Anna, and Cold Harbor, and the terrible losses in officers as well. So you also have a battered army coming in. And so they do launch an attack on June 16th, but Meade does not try to test Beauregard's flank. He essentially launches the men right into the guts of Beauregard's defensive line, and they're slaughtered. A lot of Second Corps brigade commanders are gunned down. I want to say they might lose like 5 or 6 in that one attack. The losses are 2,000 men. That's as bad as Cold Harbor for them.
Right, right.
I really think the June 16th attack in many ways was the final thing that broke Second Corps. Also, most famously, Colonel Patrick Kelly of the Irish Brigade, who had been in the Army since Bull Run with the 69th New York and had led the Irish Brigade at Fredericksburg and Gettysburg, dies. Men on Meade's staff cry when they hear the news. The Irish at that moment, the Irish Brigade is definitely no more. Right. Actually, they actually have their regiments sent elsewhere, not too long after. Now, the whole time this is going on, Beauregard is sending messages to Lee that would vary between frantically saying, "I'm under attack, I need men," or "Give me men and we can attack." And some historians, like, say, Clifford Doughty and A. Wilson Green, really hold that against Beauregard, because they say, like, "Oh, he's confusing Lee, and that's why Lee's slow to react." I'm like, I think there's some truth in that. I question why Beauregard's messages are erratic. Sometimes I think maybe he's trying to goad Lee, like, if Lee doesn't want to have a defense, because Lee has this regressive reputation, maybe if I say we'll attack, he'll throw men in. But regardless of all that, Lee keeps most of his army on the side of the James. Now, on June 16th, he starts to cross over to cover the Bermuda 100 lines, and Pickett's division goes over first. They fight Butler and drive Butler back. By the way, I call it June 16th Pickett's best day of the war.
Yeah.
The division does very well. This is not Five Forks, okay? So Pickett's men, they do drive the Federals back, but Lee is still slow to react to things. And I think one of the things that is curious to me is that Lee knows that Beauregard is under attack. But I think Lee is very Richmond focused. He's very afraid Grant is going to just swing out and throw his forces mostly at Richmond. He understands that the Richmond position can't be compromised, but nor can the Petersburg one. I think the erratic messages are confusing Lee as well. Mm-hmm. But also should be kept in mind, and I think this is something I'm really coming to the conclusion more now, and this is going to be more clear in the next book. Lee's depressed, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Where he does not want to be. Grant. Remember, you read about how Lee was reacting to McClellan advancing on Richmond. I mean, he was saying, like, we have to stop this man or he will take the city. It's the same thing right here. We think of Lee as maybe being a pugnacious and optimistic commander, but in Petersburg throughout the campaign, a lot of times he's just sending messages to Davis and Seddon and Bragg saying, "I don't think I can hold the city." Mm-hmm. So I think Lee is very much like, my God, in his mind, he's like, the game's up.
Yeah. I mean, and he famously says, like, if we get back to the James, it'll be a siege, and then it's only a matter of time. And here he sees that happening, right?
Yeah, mere question of time. Mm-hmm. So I think there's depression, and also just that intense heat, and an exhausting campaign too. One of the things that really sticks out to me is with the Overland campaign. One of the ways which the Overland campaign really impresses me with Lee is, Longstreet, wounded day 2 of Wilderness. Right. Ewell cracks up. A.P. Hill's health is terrible. Jeb Stuart dies. Lee really has to get in there and be an active army commander in ways that he didn't have to be in some of the previous battles. Right. Because he can't lean on the subordinates the way he was before. So I also think by the time Lee's getting to Petersburg, he's just like, what's that meme? "I'm tired, boss." I think he's also exhausted, but it's the same. But the same thing's true for Grant. Right. You look at Grant and Meade's letters and the really up to Petersburg. They don't sound like enthusiastic, eager men. They sound tired. And Meade, in particular, sounds like he's already decided it's going to be a siege anyway. Yeah. And I say that because you get day 3 at Petersburg. Now, 9th Corps was only lightly engaged in the second day. They arrived, their men were tired. They rest that night. They launch a daylight attack that overruns an entire Confederate brigade and takes Hickory Hill. And that was done by Robert Potter, one of the best division commanders in the Union Army. Now, the follow-up division was led by James Ledlie, often considered the worst division commander in the Union Army. Yeah, yeah. I found out though Ledley's excessive drinking was partially due to health. He had caught malaria in North Carolina and it messed with him his entire life. And a lot of people who knew him said that's when he really started hitting the bottle.
Mm.
So he's self-medicating.
Okay.
He shouldn't be in command, of course, and he should know better too. But anyways, so sorry. So Ledley doesn't follow up the attack, and Meade spends roughly around lunchtime just writing a letter to his wife instead of having another attack being made. It's almost like Meade's resigned himself to this is not really going to work. Burnside launches another attack of the division, which is bloodily repulsed. It's one of the worst assaults of the war because he has a lone division just charge into the middle of the Confederate line.
Uh,
That's Wilcox's division. And then he launches another attack, this time with Ledley's division further south. But Ledley's so drunk he can't take command. So the command goes to Colonel Jacob Gould, who's very good. And Gould's men manage to penetrate the Confederate line. And the Confederates have to rush troops there. Beauregard said at that moment he thought he had heard the death bell of the Confederacy. I'm paraphrasing. That's essentially what he says. And at that moment, they can win the battle.
mm-hmm.
But Second Corps makes some attacks to support them, but their attacks are rebuffed because the Confederates have good terrain. And Fifth Corps, led by Warren, had just arrived. They were tired. They were hot. And I do think Warren improved a lot as a Corps commander after Petersburg, but I think this battle is his worst battle of the war.
Yeah.
Because he does not press forward, and he has an almost exposed right flank, and he just doesn't send his men in. And so that lodgment, after hours of brutal combat, similar, the way it's described by the men who were in there, it reminds me of the crater in the Mule Shoe. But it's smaller scale, though. So understand, only a few brigades, but we're talking about brigades that are locked in combat for 3 to 4 hours. And, numerous accounts of hand-to-hand combat happening in there. And one account I found where 2 officers actually have a sword fight at one point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and yeah, we're talking about veterans of battles like Antietam. We're saying this was as bad, if not worse than Antietam, the ones who were in there. But eventually the lodgment is reduced. The Federals are thrown back. The next day, by the way, when the Union Army marches in the area, they do find the bodies actually piled up in places from where the men were fighting intensely in a very confined spot. So there actually were men dying on top of each other in some areas. At any rate, though, Beauregard knows the Union has almost succeeded, and he also knows by this time the Union has several corps forward and very close to his lines. And he realizes that if the Federals attack in the morning, it's over. He does not have enough men. So he does 2 things. He had already been working on a backup defensive line in a better position. He decides the army will retreat at night and fall back to that position. They do this very, very well. The Federals don't detect it. And when the Federals advance, they do advance in the morning like Beauregard feared. They actually picked up barely any stragglers. It was one of the best and gutsiest tactical maneuvers of the war, and he pulls it off flawlessly. At the same time, Beauregard, instead of sending a telegram to Lee, sends personal messengers to implore him and say, get here now. Now, Lee had already decided the army was going to march to reach there on June 18th. But the last messenger, he sends 3 messengers, but the one that's really effective is Giles Cook, who is friends with Walter Taylor. So Cook is able to wake up Lee and go, like Zidri says, like, you have to go there now. Not like, don't like march now. Do not wait till morning. Don't arrive at like 11 a.m. Go there now. And so Lee immediately goes, all right, this is important. Then he gets the orders out. Kershaw's division makes a forced march. That many of the men says one of the hardest forced marches of the war. And they march down, and it is serendipitous because they arrive just as the Federals are attacking Beauregard's last line. So just as Fifth Corps is marching onto Beauregard's exposed flank, Kershaw's men have already arrived. Now, would the Federals have won if Lee had maybe spent a few more hours getting there? I'm not saying they would have. Remember, they bungled this badly. But what I am saying is the moment Lee gives Kershaw the order to start marching around, I'm going to say sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning, roughly, That's when it's really over.
Hmm.
But Meade then has a personal breakdown in the battle. They find the last Confederate line. They attack. The attacks are rebuffed. Meade's temper snaps, and he tells everybody, everyone attack. Don't bother about coordination. So then you get a series of disjointed attacks of divisions, sometimes lone brigades, charging in and being cut to pieces. The most infamous example of this is the 1st Maine Heavy Artillery. They charge near Hare House Hill, and there's 900 of them, and in about 10 to 15 minutes, they lose 600. And that's the cover of the book, is the National Park Service's portrait of it, the painting they did of it, which is a good painting, but I always have to comment, it's not bloody enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and the same thing with the Don Triani painting for Petersburg. Here, I'll grab it real quick.
Yeah. I mean, and all those art
Yeah, like
portrayals of
this
these
one,
things
right?
tend to be pretty cleansed. Yeah.
Yeah, they do. And this one right here, I mean, it really, one thing I love about it is it does give you the sense of the rush, because they are ordered rush forward, right?
Yeah.
And I always assume with this one, I'm looking at it being like, okay, this is right before the slaughter happens. That's what this is. And maybe the same thing with the other one as well. But even then, yeah, you're right. A lot of the art does tend to be a little more cleansed, but that one always really strikes me just because of just how terrible the losses are. Should be noted, the fact that they rushed forward very quickly meant they did pick up Confederate pickets. So they did actually take some prisoners.
Yeah. Okay.
But other than that, they just get butchered. Um, Numerous soldiers who saw it said it was the most horrible sight they'd seen in the war, or they said like one of them said the only thing I saw worse was Cold Harbor, which had, of course, happened like 2 weeks before, really.
Sure.
And yeah, the 1st Maine is slaughtered. Uh, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain suffers a horrific wound that everybody thinks that he's going to die, and that's how he gets his promotion to general. But he's not alone. There's one brigade in 9th Corps that loses their like 4th brigade commander of the battle.
Jeez.
Yeah. But 9th Corps gains an advanced position, which sets up for the crater because they're close to the lines. But regardless, Beauregard has held the line. And last thing I forgot to mention was, where's Grant during all of this? Grant was only there for the 2nd day. He was very happy with, by the way, he was very happy with William F. Smith. Later on, he would blame Smith and say Smith failed. Not the time. The time he's like, Smith did great. He's happy with Smith.
After Smith falls from grace, he certainly
Yeah.
becomes an easier scapegoat, right?
Yeah. No, at the time though, he's like, no, Smith's great. He did good. He did good. Anyways, what happens is
It's like Rosecrans after Iuka. Yeah, he's fine, fantastic. He's fantastic. And then later, it's like, oh no, he's terrible. He botched that.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean that's the way Grant operates. I did by the way find a painting by Julian, what's his name, Julian Smith, the one I think he was the artist who did like the Vermont Brigade at Cedar Creek.
Okay.
He was here for the around this time. He did a few sketches. He actually did a sketch of Grant and Smith just hanging out in front of a tent.
Hmm.
Which the Vermont Historical Society, I was like, that's Grant and Smith. They're like, well, we're not sure. So it just says two Union. It essentially just says two Union dudes or something, right? But anyway, I'm like, that's Grant Smith. But I look at that, I'm like, this is the final moment before they're falling out.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Wow.
it's just the two of them just sitting down, being friends, But anyway, so Grant was detached throughout the battle, and he also did one of the most perplexing maneuvers I've ever seen in the war. 6th Corps is supposed to go to Petersburg. Grant diverts them to Bermuda 100. At first, because Butler gives them positive reports. And also, I think Grant might have wanted to reinforce the position in general to hold it. But he takes men away from the point of decision to go serve under Butler. And it gets even worse because Wright and Butler have a big fight.
Yeah.
When I say fight, I mean they're yelling at each other in a tent. Soldiers outside right about, we can hear them screaming at each other. Butler says, like, I gave you an order to attack and all you give me is excuses. That kind of, I mean, there's trading strong words. It's so bad that Butler and Wright essentially tell Grant, we can't have 6th Corps here. So then Grant trades 6th Corps for 18th Corps. So on the 4th day, 18th Corps is moving away from the battle and going to Bermuda 100. So Grant is taking men away from the point of decision. So his biggest influence on the battle when the shooting starts is one of the main reasons the Union loses.
Wow.
you know.
Wow.
Uh, and that's the other thing too, which is why I think the battle is forgotten, is because if you're a partisan for Grant or Lee, this is not your battle.
Yeah.
This is not these men at their best. You know,
I,
hey,
like this is
if you're
this
a
is a,
Beauregard partisan, this is your battle.
that's what I was going to say. Like it seems like Beauregard's the one person who performs not just well, but exceptionally well.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I think Green says this, and I've heard other people say it, that, hey, it's a defensive battle. How hard could it be? And I'm like, there's a point to that. But Beauregard has the defensive lines laid out. He pulls off that excellent maneuver that night. He is constantly there moving troops around and rallying troops, especially June 17th. He comes right up there and starts rallying men, throwing those regiments in to seal that breach. So I think Beauregard's leadership is exceptional at this battle. And it's true he's fighting a Union army that is weakened, but they still outnumber him significantly. And there are a few officers, by the way, who kind of look at Meade and go, why don't we swing out and try to outflank them? But Meade is hurdling these men at these entrenchments,
Mm-hmm.
especially on June 18th. That is also, I start to think that might be Meade's worst day as a general.
Yeah.
So if you're a Meade partisan, this is not your battle either.
Yeah. Yeah. This is nobody's doing pretty well here. Let me ask you a quick question about Beauregard because I do want to follow up on that Meade point. Um, like everyone knows Petersburg's important, but like Beauregard suffers from a lack of confidence at this point because of the very strained relationship he has with Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee's being Robert E. Lee, and what kind of position is Beauregard in when he suddenly has the Union Army showing up on his doorstep at this key strategic spot? I mean, is he feeling like he's got the support that he's going to need or able to get the support he's going to need, or is he feeling a little hung out to dry?
He feels hung out to dry, definitely. I mean, a lot of the plans he had put forward in the weeks before this battle had been ignored or scuttled by Davis, Bragg, and Lee. And I'm not even saying those plans were necessarily great plans, but he is feeling ignored. And a testament to how isolated he is I found out in doing this book, I found out that Davis considered investigating Beauregard for
Oh.
abandoning the Bermuda Hundred lines. And very within a few days, Davis is like thinking about it. Then within a few days, Davis realizes I can't do this. I'm going to look real dumb,
Yeah, yeah.
But no, he thinks about it. That's how bad the relationship is. So
Wow.
Beauregard wins this great victory, and Davis's response is, "Let's investigate you." And I want to say in Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government, he gives Lee credit for the victory at Petersburg, not Beauregard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But if Beauregard doesn't hold once the Union Army first shows up, that's game over.
pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And one fun thing, we're talking about like officers who look good. Guess who looks really good during this battle? Henry Wise.
Okay.
And I'm like Henry Wise. you know, this is that's what like everybody's got their moment. This is Henry Wise's moment is June 15th. He does
Yeah.
exceptionally well in a really difficult situation.
Uh, so let me follow up on your Meade comment a second ago because it seems to me that as the overland campaign extends, Meade unravels more and more. And like, you can see at Cold Harbor where he's a bit fed up and he does not, coordinate those assaults the way he should because he's just, I think, a little petulant. And I like Meade, but and it seems like things get significantly worse by the time he gets to Petersburg.
And it's getting worse after that. Another thing that's happening is Meade's having a full breakdown of his corps commanders. Now, remember, one of the reasons Meade kept his job in the first place was how well liked he was with the subordinates of the Army of the Potomac, right? Not by now. Him and Burnside do not really talk to each other. Um, him and Wright do not get along. That relationship gets really, really bad. But Wright does exceptionally poorly at Jerusalem Plank Road to the point where his men are writing, "We think he's a drunk. We think he must be drunk." you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
And Lee, so Meade has a breakdown with Wright, with Burnside. William F. Smith and Meade hate each other.
Right.
Um,
Right.
the
And
only,
and Meade tries to get Warren fired. Rollins talks him out of that.
yeah, no, this is He tries to get Warren fired very soon after. Uh, that breakdown you're talking about that gets worse as the campaign goes on. And so three of them that really stick out to me. One is I need to find what date it happened, but there's this occasion where there's a rumor that Meade is going to be fired from the Army of the Potomac. And Theodore Lyman writes in his great diary, Meade goes, "Oh, they want to fire me? Oh, that's going to really punish me." Meade just starts laughing like this maniacal laugh of like, "Oh, guys, you're going to punish me by taking me out of command? Whoa, that's terrible." And another point, Grant considered sending Meade to the Valley, not Sheridan,
Right.
and Meade wanted it. And last but not least, this one's very telling, is after the crater, Meade sets up a court of inquiry for Burnside. And it's, of course, it's slanted against Burnside. It's full of pro-Meade officers. But even those pro-Meade officers, in their findings, they blame Burnside for the crater failure. But they also say coordination by Meade is poor. So his own supporters are getting aggravated with how poorly he's coordinating between corps. And that is bad in this battle, and it does not improve in the months after.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
And that was something I discovered, working on my Spotsy book. You really start to see that breakdown. And as I said, I like Meade. I think was a fantastic division commander. I think he does okay as an army commander, but I think he gets really discombobulated by Grant's presence and sort of like, fine, you want to be in charge of the army? And he takes his hands off the wheel, and then that just gets more and more disjointed as the campaign goes on.
yeah, there's the thing about temperament as well. Meade has that horrible temper. But I think one of the things that really hurts Meade is you got to think about this. Like right before Grant meets him, Halleck's like, fire him. Lincoln says, and Lincoln's a master of the indirect thing where he's like, you do what you want to do, but you should probably fire him. But he's hearing that like hint, wink, wink thing. Um, like, oh God, there's a thing where Lincoln visits the army right after the Battle of Petersburg, and Lincoln says in this homespun way, he's like, yeah, I just thought I'd come down and visit. I'm like, yeah, sure. You're just here to hang out, right? Sorry. Anyway, but Stanton, being Mr. Blunt, at the train station, apparently yells at Grant, "There's a weak man in that army. It'd be good to fire him."
Yeah.
So you got to think about Meade, and Meade won Gettysburg, and his reward is to be investigated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Meade is under all this pressure, and he's completely devoted to Grant insofar as he knows that Grant's the only reason he's got a job.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also can, I think Grant was a master of army politics, and Grant was very shrewd for keeping Meade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
I think he was very shrewd. But you're right. Grant starts to intervene with some functions of the army, but then Grant starts dialing it back as the campaign goes on, and especially in the Petersburg campaign. Grant essentially gives Meade directives, but at that time, Meade is worn out. He has seen he's seen horrific slaughter. He has a bad temper. He knows that the people in Washington would really like to fire him. There's constantly these rumors of him being removed from command are always swirling around him throughout the campaign. And so, yeah, Meade I think Meade was a talented army commander who essentially broke under all of this pressure.
Yeah.
And then when he broke, I think he actually probably should have been removed. He's a liability at this point.
It's one of the things that I think your book captures really well is, the toll that the overland campaign has taken on both of these armies, on the commanders. So by the time they jump the river and head to Petersburg, everything's just a hot mess. These guys are exhausted, they're brutalized, they're beaten up. And so it's, to me, the standout feature of the book that, the battle that your book brought out is like, this is just all sloppy. It's just sloppy, sloppy, sloppy. And it's just a result of that exhaustion and brutalization.
And you mentioned the heavy losses. This is one thing that also does help the Confederates. The brigades that Beauregard has, Thomas Howe said in his book that these men had garrison experience. They weren't like the best of the best by any means. By the way, pretty good movie. Anyway, so yeah, the one with Eric Roberts. But anyways, I was watching some of it a few days ago. Anyways, so he says that, but I thought he's right in a way. But also, these men had not been brutalized. These are some of the regiments that are in the best condition in either army. And one thing really does come across to me in the research is that Lee's veterans, his army, yeah, they're battered. They're very confident.
Mhm.
One of my favorite ones is this, what one guy in Kershaw's division, like looks at the ground when he's marching, he's marching and he goes like, this is good ground. We can kill a lot of Yankees here.
Uh,
I mean, so Lee's command is sloppy. They've taken heavy losses. They're tired. His soldiers, yeah, they've been battered, but one thing should be kept in mind, Lee's army is confident. Their morale is high.
yeah, yeah. How do you like you talked about Lee being depressed? Um, does that come through to his men at all? Do they get glimpses of that?
Not that I've seen,
Yeah.
um, but it, I don't pretend to be like a Lee expert, like one of those biographers. But Lee comes across to me as a general who is very popular with his men because he wins battles and he has a good presence and he can be very inspirational, but a bit detached.
Hmm. Sure,
You
sure.
know, um, like I remember reading about Beauregard before Drury's Bluff, the battle on May 16th. The night before, he wandered around the camp smoking a cigar, talking to some of the men and saying, and some of the men are like, "We're tired of defending." He's like, "Don't worry, we're going to change that."
Yeah.
There's there's a certain touch that men like Beauregard or Hancock in the Union Army just have that I don't really think Lee has. He seems a bit Olympian in a way, like
Yeah, sure. Oh, that's a great way to describe it. I would agree
yeah,
with that.
yeah. But at the same time, I don't think Lee's like some inaccessible guy. And obviously, he's beloved by his men, but I don't think they have as much interaction with him as you'd think. You know. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that being said, I know, like, say, for instance, in spring 1865, Lee's visiting APL's Third Corps all the time.
Yeah.
But I don't get the feeling that Lee's doing this as much. And I do get the feeling that, I remember this is a guy who dies 5 years after the war.
Right.
I think we're seeing his health crack up too.
Sure.
And we also got to remember, just we were talking about the heavy loss and everything. We cannot forget the heat.
Right.
This is being fought in the midst of a terrible heat wave that will go on until like the third week of July. And not like the
Mhm.
fourth week of July was cool weather, but everybody's commenting at this time on this is some of the hottest weather of their life.
Yeah.
You know, cannot
Yep.
doubt that effect on the men. Heat makes you lethargic. Believe
Oh, for
me.
sure. Yeah.
Believe me. I'm from New Orleans. I know.
What happens to the dynamics between Lee and Beauregard when Lee finally gets there? Because obviously two very strong-willed, big egos, big personalities. How do they mesh?
Lee and Beauregard to me have one of the oddest relationships of the war because there is a lot of mutual respect between them. And remember, they had not just served in Mexico, they were in Scotch Engineer Company together. There's plenty of times Beauregard and Lee in Mexico were scouting together or going just, or, there's one occasion where they almost both got shot by their own men in Mexico. So these guys go far back.
Yeah.
And they know each other. And keeping in mind, Lee constantly was advising Davis put Beauregard in command of the Army of Tennessee. He was constantly telling him to do that.
Right.
So, and Lee also tried to get Beauregard to become a corps commander under him in 1863 and then 1864. And that is, partially it's Lee wants more troops, but also he trusts Beauregard.
Right.
And when he arrives on June 18th, he is very impressed. He looks at what Beauregard's done. He's like, "You've done an impressive job holding the line." He looks at the position Beauregard and David Harris, Beauregard's brilliant engineer, had chosen. And Lee says, you've chosen an excellent position. And Lee starts to lean on Beauregard, but then there's the June 24th attack outside of Petersburg that Beauregard oversaw. That was a failure. And after that, Lee and Beauregard do not talk quite as much. That
Mm.
being said, for instance, the time of Globe Tavern, Lee goes to Fusil's Mill and takes part in that battle. Beauregard leaves Beauregard in command in Petersburg, and he knows that he's leaving it in the hands of a capable commander. Beauregard thought Lee was if not one of the South's best generals. Remember, Beauregard thinks he's the best. Okay,
Yeah.
now,
Right. Yeah.
but he would say this about Lee. In Beauregard's writings, in one sentence, he would highly praise Lee. And him and Lee kept up a correspondence after the war with Beauregard asking Lee for advice. And also, Beauregard at one point boasting to Lee about how good he was doing at railroads.
Yeah.
But at the same time, then a few sentences later, Beauregard would be like, "Yeah, but Lee had problems." Like, for instance, Beauregard was really critical of the Gettysburg campaign before it even starts. He said, "What use is this raid? We need to go save Vicksburg."
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, Beauregard and Lee, a very odd relationship in that regard. But I think Lee wanted to make Beauregard a confidant, but didn't quite, especially after June 24th.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
and last one to mention too. Remember, they're at the crater together.
Okay.
They're both in the basement looking at the battle. Uh, Beauregard's troops are the ones who take the initial attack in the crater. And it's Beauregard set up the overall defensive plan to react to any breach by having backup lines, backup cannons, and having the orders to the men like, okay, if the lines are breached, this is what you do. So I'm very much of the opinion that the crater, Beauregard plays a major role in the Confederate victory at the crater just because of the pre-battle planning.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. It seemed like much of the Confederate success at Petersburg is because Beauregard had thought all this stuff out in advance, and so was able to react to things
yeah.
because of that planning.
Now take this into consideration, though. Beauregard could, I mean, he's not like a magician. There is a period right before this where he goes like, I don't know if he's coming for Petersburg, but for the most part, he's pretty sure that Grant's going to Petersburg. One of the guys who really convinced him, by the way, is Daniel Harvey Hill. D.H. Hill briefly serves as division commander under Beauregard. Beauregard wanted him under him. They actually got along well, which is really shocking because this is
I was gonna, yeah.
you know. But no, him and Hill were at one point around the time of Cold Harbor because Beauregard's not there. He's at 300. Him and Hill are just talking, and he's like, "Hill, what do you think Grant's going to do?" And Hill says he's going to Petersburg.
Yeah.
You know.
Hill's one of those guys. I think he was brilliant and he was super effective on the field and couldn't get along with his own mother, for crying out loud. I mean,
Yeah.
just couldn't get along with anybody.
But he's like in that regard also kind of reminds me of a more acidic version of David Stanley,
Oh
the
yeah, yeah.
commander out west, because they're both also really talented commanders, very brave. But one of the funniest things ever to me was Hill had that mathematics textbook he wrote before the war, where you have to calculate how fast two northern two like Yankee troops are running away from a battlefield in Mexico. Just ridiculous stuff like that.
So
we're saying as a joke. I'm pretty sure Hill would be like, "No, it's not funny.
yeah,
That's
he meant it. He meant it for sure.
that's serious, guys."
so the Battle of Petersburg then is a failure for the Union Army and settles into what becomes the Siege of Petersburg. How does that process happen? How do we go from being in battle mode to, well, let's settle in and kind of wait this out?
I think Gary Gallagher's made a really good point that maybe the overland campaign ends at the crater.
Okay.
I personally think the overland campaign ends at Jerusalem Plank Road, the
Okay.
follow-up battle. And we'll talk more about that when that book comes out, but just the basics on it. Grant says on June 18th, let's give the men a rest. And then like 2 days later, he's like, let's attack. And I think it is that political pressure.
Yeah.
And the attack was decided before Lincoln arrived, but then Lincoln arrives to look at the army. At that point, if Grant had any misgivings, that ain't going to happen. He's attacking.
Right.
The other thing, too, is the Petersburg battle was fun thing about this, too, was very poorly reported in the northern papers. Now, I'd say they'd be like, all battles poorly reported. No, this one's really poorly reported. So roughly about a week after this battle, everybody up north thinks Petersburg's fallen and the war is won. George Templeton Strong in his diary goes like, "Oh my God, we've won this great victory. We've got it." And then a few days later, he's like, "God, we've suffered one of the worst defeats ever." And there's a real dip in morale in the North. And also, Stanton had tried to suppress how bad Cold Harbor was, but the truth got out.
Right.
That doesn't help either.
Right.
So Grant very quickly launches another attack. This is a bad idea. The army does need a rest. And so Grant swings out 2nd and 6th Corps. And, I think on the Wikipedia page, you make it sound like Grant's extending his lines. No, he's not. He's trying to cut the rail lines to take Petersburg. But he's got a big problem because remember, throughout the overland campaign, Grant could have like, like a kind of like have like a base, right? And then he could swing out from the base, right? He could swing out from the base in such a way to where his current base wasn't under threat as much. He can't do that here. The
Mm,
way he has to rely on supplies from City Point. The further out he swings, the more exposed City Point becomes, and there's nowhere for him to get supplies elsewhere.
right.
It's not like they have. I mean, okay, they hold Norfolk, but they don't have the Norfolk Railroad. That stretches in Confederate hands.
Hmm.
So Grant can't swing the army out. Now, Warren actually recommends that and says, forget City Point, swing the whole army out, break Lee's lines, and have a do or die battle. I think Bryce, who's a big Warren fan, he's like, Warren has got the right idea. That's how they eventually win at 5-4. Because I told Bryce, I'm like, you're right. Warren has the right idea, but not for the right time. This army
Yeah.
needs a break.
Yeah.
Grant kind of does like a half Warren. Like, we'll not send the whole army. We'll just send 2 corps out who don't coordinate with each other. Uh, and Second Corps at that point is led by David Birney, decent commander, but he's new to Corps command. The Second Corps is in horrible condition. You've got Sixth Corps Horatio G. Wright, who's another guy who I don't think he met too many superiors he liked.
Yeah.
And him and Meade, their relationship just gets really, really bad during all this. Anyways, so the Confederates attack with Mahone's division, like 3 brigades, and rout 2.5 divisions of Second Corps. Capture cannon, flags. Mahone later on says that if Cadmus Wilcox had pitched his men in, they could have taken the whole thing out. But
Mhm.
that's I think that's more due to AP Hill doing poor coordination between the divisions. But the point is that right after Jerusalem Plank Road, offensive operations stop. I need to look more into this, but there, according to John Rawlins, Grant goes to the front line and gets drunk. I don't know the details on this, but William F. Smith thought that Butler found out about that, and that's how Butler kept his job in part, was blackmailing Grant. I don't know the details on that, but what I have detected is that even if Grant didn't get drunk, there's a few days where he kind of goes missing.
Mhm.
And I think because he's sitting down being like, we can't take the city right now. And then Meade sending him messages being like, the siege train should really come up.
Yeah.
And, Meade had already been thinking that way. And then you essentially see Grant around early July go, okay, it's a siege. Well,
Okay.
and we say siege, I mean, they're not surrounded, of course, they get supplies, but, you're going to have these long entrenched lines. So I personally think that's right around last week of June, first week of July is when Grant realizes this is what I'm in for.
Yeah.
And uh, the reason I don't date the crater as the end of the Overland campaign is that Meade didn't take Burnside's project seriously.
Right.
Grant Grant was like, hey, do what you want to. We'll see how it works out, right? But there's that battle at Deep Bottom that happens at the same time. And later on, Meade and Grant make it look like Deep Bottom was a diversion for the crater. No, it wasn't. They did Deep Bottom, and then they went, let's go attack at the crater. The crater attack was not properly integrated. I don't think Grant or Meade were that serious about their prospects at the crater.
Mhm.
But I detect that Grant was serious about Jerusalem Plank Road, that they are going to smash the Confederate. They're going to take the South Side Railroad and cut off Petersburg. And then it not only doesn't happen, but Second Corps is humiliated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So,
oh, by the way, it's so bad in Second Corps, they stripped I think it's 2 brigade commanders are removed.
uh,
Um,
well, and of course, by that point, I mean, they are so pummeled. The officer attrition has been just
Horrific.
decimated over the course of the Overland campaign. Because because Grant keeps using the Second Corps as his hammer, 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 and like there's just nothing left to hammer with by the time they get to.
And in some ways, it can't, like, of course, of course, people would say, like, oh, they keep using Second Corps, but it's like, of course, who are you going to trust?
Yeah.
Right? I
Yeah.
mean, like, Burnside has his strengths, but, a lot of the reasons that he doesn't do as well in the crater is already here at Petersburg. He was detached from the action. He was seeing divisions in piecemeal. Also, he was so detached that the fact that Ledley's division pierced the line made him think Ledley wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
So people are like, why didn't he remove Ledley? It's like he actually wasn't quite aware how bad this guy was.
Yeah,
Um,
right,
and then infamously at the crater, he has him draw straws and decide which division, instead of like actually being a commander and choosing.
right.
Horatio Wright is new to his job. Horatio Wright got better as the war went on, but at this point, he does not really know what he's doing, and he's a
Mhm.
cantankerous man who's
Yeah.
willing to ignore the orders of superiors and even yell at them sometimes. Um, I think it went, yeah, yeah. I mean, Wright essentially says the equivalent of Meade's a tactical buffoon at one point. Um, yeah, of course you can rely on Second Corps. Who else you got? Oh, and then there's Warren, but Warren's also a cantankerous fellow, you
Right.
know?
Who's pretty much lost the confidence of his commanders by that point. So
Yeah, yeah. Although interestingly enough, I think it's kind of sad that as Warren gets better as the campaign goes on, but his commanders never seem to notice that.
yeah, right.
Kind of
They've
sad.
lost
It's
they've lost
they've lost confidence, so they're like, yeah, like Warren wins Globe Tavern and Grant complains about it.
yeah.
And I'm like, dude, he just won. You don't have too many victories, man. But understandably, like once again, Warren had not done, and particularly this battle, Warren didn't do very well. And yeah, by the time he's getting better, his commanders don't really notice.
Yeah.
It also
So
didn't help
we're
that it also didn't help that Warren had a horrible temper.
yeah, oh yeah, for sure. For
Oh, he
sure.
also, do you know about him in limericks?
No.
Oh, he would uh his own subordinates, like they generally liked him because he was brave and everything. And I've read accounts that after the war was over, when Warren would enter a room, like he would get standing ovations because he was a brave man who had done some really good stuff for the army. But he also could snap at people, and he also this thing about like sitting by, reciting limericks that he had written or had read, and going and then laughing to himself. And I think Charles Wainwright sometimes writes, he's like, I think my superior is touched in the head.
So we're recording this, the anniversary of these battles, the Battle of Petersburg's coming up. If someone wants to get out onto the field, what are things that you would recommend they should go see related to the Battle of Petersburg, as opposed to the overall siege?
Yeah, they have the June 15th, the Jordan's Hill, which was the main Confederate, the kind of linchpin of the Confederate defense, and the one that William F. Smith overruns. You can check out that hill. It's right near the Visitor Center. It's also worth walking along Harrison's Creek because that was a I mean it's a small creek, but the terrain was used effectively by the Confederates to hold them off. You definitely want to go to the first main heavy artillery monument,
Hmm.
which can be a little hard to find at first because when you get to that part, they're really playing up Fort Stedman that
Right.
happened in that area.
Same ground happening, actions
Yeah.
happening 9 months apart in different orientation.
So what you do is if you're on the Union side and you want to go to where the Confederates are, if you're walking down, I was looking for, I was like, where's the first main monument? And I'm looking over, I'm like, oh, there it is. It's like off, kind of a little bit off the path. And there's like, I think there's a fence nearby because there's some residential development in the area now.
Right.
But they have the names of all the men killed and wounded and captured uh, in the attack.
Yeah.
It's one of the most powerful Civil War monuments I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I put it
I
right up
agree.
there with the Hazen Brigade Monument at Stones River. That'd be
Mhm.
another one. Um, anyway, so you definitely want to check that one out. If when you go to Burnside's area for the crater, of course they're playing up the crater, but I have to say visiting that one really helped me understand how the attacks went in that area on June 18th.
Okay.
His Ninth Corps is able to take a railroad cut and then advance further than anybody else. And those advanced positions are how they're going to be able to burrow under the lines to put the powder in to blow the hole in, you know.
Mhm.
Uh, so that one's that's a very good one for that as well. So yeah, they have certain individual stuff markered out for sure,
Yeah.
you know.
Cool. Very good.
Of course I wish it was bigger.
Yeah, sure.
The one I really wish we had some stuff for, because we do have stuff for Petersburg, of course, but some of the other Petersburg battles, like we don't have anything for Jerusalem Plank Road. It's got like a roadside marker.
Yeah.
And then then you have to read the thing that says go to the crossroads to look over there and be like, that's where Mahone went in, sort of thing. I really wish we had Jerusalem Plank Road,
Mm.
that battle.
Yeah.
But no, we do have Petersburg stuff. I'm very thankful for it.
Yeah. So, just as we get ready to wrap up, this is the first in what will be several more books about the Petersburg campaign that we'll be seeing from you. You're working with some great collaborators as you're pulling this together. You want to
Yeah.
give a plug to the team that you're working with real quick?
Well, I got John Schmutz for is working with me on the Crater one. Uh, Volume 3, I've got Mark Jacobson and Jerry Netherland, and they're really involved in Globe Tavern reinstation, like preservation, and they're writing a really detailed account of reinstation. They're going to try to get published. And then what else? Volume 5 um, is I mean, volume 4 is pretty much all me, and then volume 5 is mostly me. But I did get Nigel Lambert to write a little bit about Hatcher's Run,
Right, right.
you know, and also Dwight Hughes wrote about Trent's Reach,
Yeah.
so that'll be in there, you know.
So very good, very good. And
Yeah,
Bryce
yeah.
Suderow has been helping you out with a lot of the
Oh
research,
yeah,
and
yeah. Of course, Bryce is one of the best researchers around, and somebody you can throw ideas off on. And besides that, I mean, other people read over the stuff too, like John Horn.
Mhm.
Getting some help from him, Hampton Newsom. Yeah, a bunch of guys. Yeah.
Cool, fantastic. Well, we're
It's gonna
looking
be
forward to seeing the collection pan out.
I am too, man. I'm excited. I found a bunch of images. There's a certain point where the National Tribune started to really illustrate their stuff.
Yeah.
So I got the Stars and Stripes Museum to send me a bunch of stuff so I can get some of their images from the National Tribune. And this is what I'm really happy about. You look at Pains of Five Forks, it's always shared on a horse,
Yeah.
right? Like, God, even the Mike McCarthy book about how, Warren, especially Warren rules and Sheridan sucks. I'm being simplistic, but, even that book, which is about the injustice done to Warren, Sheridan's on the cover on his damn horse, right?
Yeah.
Well, the National Tribune, somebody must have been a Warren fan because they have like 2 or 3 illustrations of Five Forks, and it's not, they have one with Sheridan, they have like 2 of them with Warren.
Mhm.
2 or 3 with Warren. And I'm like, finally, we found some Warren at Five Forks pictures. All right.
Well, with Sheridan, then you have a horse's ass on a horse. That's I kind of understand
What
it. A
it
horse with
was,
two asses. What's that?
well, remember what he say? Warren, what did he tell Warren? Reconsider hell. I don't
Yeah.
reconsider decisions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but to be fair to be fair to Warren at Five Forks, can't lie, man. It's pretty cool when he jumps that horse over the line. I can't blame him for illustrating over and over again. It's really dramatic,
Yeah, that's true. That is true. So, Sean, thanks for taking some time to chat with us today.
You're
So
welcome. Glad to be
appreciate it.
here.
Yeah. So I'm Chris Bukowski on behalf of John Schick for the Emerging Civil War podcast. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.